and welcome back to our One Wild and Precious Lives and Our Dogs. I'm really excited about today's conversation. I'm going to talk to Sue Yanoff, a board-certified veterinary surgeon who has a special interest in canine sports medicine. And we'll talk about the life quality of free-roaming dogs versus pet dogs today, which is a topic that I'm really passionate about. Sue, would you like to introduce yourself and your canine family properly?
Okay, I'll start with my dogs first. I have beagles. That is my breed. I do performance sports with my beagles. I have titled beagles in obedience, agility, tracking, and conformation. Right now I have 2 beagles. Actually, that's my limit in pet dogs is 2. So Ivy, who's 10 years old, is a champion, a mock, has her CDX and TD, and we're working on our utility title. And Quinn, who just turned 3, is being trained in agility and obedience and is 1 major away from her championship. Yeah, so we do a lot. But the most important thing is that they are my companions and hiking buddies. If I could do nothing else with them except enjoy their company and go hiking, that would be fine with me too.
Yeah.
As you said, I'm a veterinarian. I graduated in 1980, so that's a long time ago. And I've done a lot over my career, but the important thing now is that I'm mostly retired. I do a couple of days a week of surgery at local clinics, and I take on-call emergency surgery call once a month at the practice. I used to practice surgery. And for the last 10 years of my career, so I worked with a friend who's also a licensed veterinary technician and a human physical therapist. And we had a pretty active sports medicine practice, but we both decided we're too old to want to work that hard anymore. So now I will occasionally see a dog for a friend, and I'll also see dogs for our local law enforcement police departments.
Oh, nice.
If they have an issue that I can help them with. But mostly I spend time with my dogs and working a few days a month.
Oh, sounds like you're living the good life.
Yeah, I am now.
Well, I'm really grateful to have Sue in my life for all kinds of reasons, but in terms of free-roaming dogs, because she's someone whose veterinary knowledge I trust and who can help me fact-check my opinions. Most of the free-roamers I see when I'm walking around wherever I happen to be living in Latin America seem to be in a decent physical condition. But every once in a while, I'll see an injured dog, and then I'll get curious. For example, one free roamer Game and I know well. We used to walk past him most days, and one day I noticed a relatively large wound on his lower back leg. And that made me sad and a little worried because I have a relationship with this dog. It usually goes that Game makes friends with certain free roaming dogs, and then because she's friends with them, I get to be their friend as well. So I wondered what would happen to this dog, knowing that he was unlikely to get veterinary attention. I wondered if the wound was going to get infected and if he was going to die a slow and painful death. But I'm not a vet and I had no idea how to judge the severity of the wound. I also wasn't going to interfere either way. This is not my dog, he's someone else's dog. But I did take a picture of the wound and ask Sue for her opinion about his likely future. This was one of those learning moments that I treasure so much. Thank you for this, Sue. So she explained to me that the exposed tissue in the wound looked like granulation tissue. And granulation tissue is resistant to infection. So while the healing process might be very slow, it was unlikely that the wound would get infected, even without daily washing or cleaning or bandaging. And indeed, a few weeks later, the wound was almost closed up. And by now, several months later, you wouldn't be able to tell that it ever was there. This is fascinating to me. I would have rushed my own dog to the vet with this kind of injury. And in this part of the world, they would have given me antibiotics right away. And also I would have put her on restricted activity. I'd be probably cleaning the wound every day and bandaging it and, just spending a lot of time on it. Nobody did that with this dog and he still healed up. It's so interesting to me. And then just last week, I was on a road trip and I saw a free roamer next to a highway who was holding one front leg up so it wouldn't touch the ground. And when he was running, the lower leg just swang back and forth as if he didn't have any control over it. So I assumed that this was from an old car accident because of the location right next to that freeway. And also because I could see the dog run out into the street when Game and I walked past on the opposite side of the other sidewalk. So he apparently has not learned to avoid the street. So I didn't know this dog, but I wondered if he was in pain and if he would be in pain for the rest of his life. or if he was doing just fine and not in pain, and basically just carrying that weight around while living his best life. And I tend to be suspicious about myself when I think something about a dog that I know is an opinion, and I like challenging my opinions with facts. So my gut feeling said, oh, this dog is not in pain. But because I don't have that education, I'm aware of the fact that I really don't know. And in this situation, there were definitely facts to be found. So I took a video of that dog and Sue to the rescue. I sent her the video of the dog running as he was barking at Game and me. And I asked her if she thought he was in pain. These are all informal conversations, obviously. Sue is not diagnosing anyone here. She's just helping me order my own thoughts. She pointed out to me that the dog in my video looked like he was injured at or just below the elbow joint. That's why he couldn't put weight on the leg, because he couldn't extend his elbow. She made me aware of 2 seconds in the video where it looked like he was extending his carpus, which meant that the nerves to the extensor muscle still worked. I had missed these 2 seconds before. I hadn't realized he could still extend. And it was likely, since those nerves still worked, that the sensory nerves also still worked, which meant that he would be in chronic pain and continue being in chronic pain for the rest of his life. And I watched these 2 seconds of my video, and now I could see them as well, that moment of extension. So with this dog, clearly my initial completely unfactual hunch, which had been that he probably wasn't in pain, that was clearly wrong. That led us to a brief conversation about the life quality of free-roaming dogs versus an average pet dog. Long story short, we want to extend this conversation today. To get us started, we'll just have to define what a free-roaming dog and an average pet actually are, because maybe we're talking about completely different things when our opinions diverge here. Sue, speaking of those definitions, I'm sure you've seen many average pet dogs as a veterinarian. What is their life like? What does it mean to be an average pet dog?
So I was thinking about this a lot since we decided to have this discussion. And the bottom line is, it's really hard to define what an average pet dog is. And I'll tell you what I think, and then I'll tell you what the outliers are. So in my experience, and I've been a veterinarian for 42 years. I've been in private practice, I've been in referral practice, I've been in specialty practice. But when I think of the average pet dog, I think of the people that just come in to the vet clinic on a routine basis once a year, or if their pet is sick. And it's a dog that basically is mostly pampered. Most of them are overweight and not underweight.
Yeah.
Most of them don't get as much activity as I think a dog should have, because I think of my dogs, and my dogs are in the category of what I consider performance dogs, and they are treated differently. They get more activity, they get more training, but the average pet dog doesn't have a lot of training. Some of them are quite well behaved, some of them are not very well behaved, and they just basically have their needs met, and we can define or discuss what the needs are, but food, clothing, shelter, basically. So they have a place to stay indoors, out of the elements. They are well fed, sometimes too well fed.
Yeah.
If they have an injury or an illness, they are taken to the veterinarian. And they basically just live a life where they kind of exist. They might go for a walk around the block. They might have a fenced in yard. Most pet dogs in the United States, at least, are not free roaming, partly because there are laws against it, and partly because people don't want to just let their dogs out and worry what's going to happen to them while they're out there.
Animal control would pick them up, I suppose, right? Mostly.
Animal control would pick them up. A neighbor might pick them up and call the owner. Some good Samaritan might find them. And if they have identification on their collars, they would call the owner to come get them. So there are options, but free roaming dogs, I mean, there are strays and there are dogs that get lost, but there are not populations of free roaming dogs in most places in the United States. Now I have traveled a lot, and so I have been in places where there are free roaming dogs that I've observed. I'm like you, I have opinions also about the free roaming dogs that I have observed.
What places have you observed them?
Places like southern Italy, Sicily. I'm thinking of I spent a week in Sicily at a beach town, and there was a group of dogs. Papua New Guinea and some more rural areas of Australia. And then also I've been in Central America, Panama, and have seen dogs actually in Panama City. So, and again, when you talk about street dogs, there are urban street dogs and country street dogs, and so you can define the average street dog. That's not my area of expertise or much experience, but I do have a lot of experience with pet dogs, and that's what I think of. And then there are pet dogs that do not have good lives, that are abused, not well taken care of, tied out in the backyard to a chain, are thin, and they have ectoparasites like fleas and ticks, and endoparasites like intestinal worms. And, I also work at shelters doing spay neuter clinics once a month or so. And so I see the shelter population of dogs, and I hear about dogs that are brought in as abuse cases, and I hear about animals that are brought in as part of hoarding where they're not well taken care of. And that's really, it's sad how people handle pets, but I don't consider those average pets. So the super well taken care of dogs are on one end of the spectrum, and then the misused or abused dogs are at the other end, and then everything else is in the middle, and that is what I consider an average pet.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good definition. I was just thinking about this because right before our Zoom call, I was walking with Game, and I thought about how I would define a pet dog and how I would define an average free roaming dog. And what really stands out to me about your definition of the average pet dog is that you focus on the things that they do get and the things that they do have, the advantages they have in their lives. Versus I, as I was thinking about it, thought about the disadvantages. So I didn't primarily think about their access, for example, to veterinary care or food. I was thinking more about the lifestyle of their humans. So I was thinking, well, the average pet dog probably is owned by someone or by a family who work 8 to 10 hours a day. So that pet dog spends, let's say, maybe 5 days a week, 10 hours by themselves, and maybe created during that time. That's one of the reasons that I have strong opinions, or that to me, that seems like a welfare issue. It doesn't seem right to be isolated. I'm assuming the average pet dog is just one dog, so they don't have the company of other dogs, and kenneling for hours. I feel like that's okay for working dogs because their needs in terms of mental and physical stimulation are being met. So they're happy just sleeping the rest of the time. But I'm assuming the average pet dog just walks around the block once or twice a day. Their physical and mental needs are maybe not being met. And if your physical and mental needs are not being met, and then you're basically in solitary prison for the rest of the day, that seems horrible to me. Is that part of the average pet dog's life as well? Or am I just making things up here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I agree with you that being crated for 8 or 10 hours a day without a break is not in the best interest of the dog's needs. I don't have any data on how many dogs are crated versus left home alone. I would argue, and again, this is an opinion, that most pet dogs are not crated. I don't know how many households in the US are multi-dog households. I know a lot of them are. I don't have that data. I think it's available. So a lot of households have more than one dog or a dog and a cat. There are on days that I work for 8 or 10 hours, my dogs are home alone. They are not crated. Of course, they're crated when they're puppies until I can trust them to be loose in the house during the day. But my dogs are lucky. I have a doggy door and a fenced-in backyard that I am not worried about them getting out of. I live out in the country and surrounded by woods, so there are wild animals out here, but I'm not worried about wild animals getting into the fenced yard. I don't know how much time my dogs spend outside versus inside when I'm not home. I know when I am home, like right now, my dogs are fast asleep in their dog beds. I have three dog beds in my den, so they get to choose where they sleep. They always are in the den with me when I'm here because they like to be around me. So right now they're sleeping because there's nothing else for them to do. They don't have to go looking for their own food. They don't have to go looking for a safe place to stay. But I agree with you. I mean, a dog that's home alone 8 or 10 hours a day, is that cruel? Is that okay? It's what they're used to. They don't know any different. So if they don't know any different, is it okay?
Yeah, that's an interesting question in and of itself. If you don't know any different, does that mean you can't be unhappy about the life you have?
Well, that's a good question. I mean,
so
and
if you're a zoo animal who was born in a cage and lives a cage life and has never been out in running around being free and is in a pretty small cage, how does that animal feel? I mean, I guess we can know. We could know if we put them in an MRI scanner, I guess.
Well, we can also know from their behavior. So a lot
Yeah.
of zoo animals, and I would argue even some pet animals, have what we call stereotypic behavior.
Yeah.
That's not normal behavior. I listened to the Lemonade conference talk you gave, I don't know, was it last year, I think, about free roaming dogs and the 5 freedoms, which I thought was an excellent way to address it. But again, who defines what normal, the freedom to exercise normal behavior?
Yeah.
What's normal behavior for a pet dog that was, brought into the world very artificially and, went to its new home at 8 weeks of age, and it's home alone every day for 8 hours. If it's lucky, somebody will come take it out for a walk midday, but I know a lot of dogs don't get that. And that's all it knows.
I would have thought the majority of them are actually crated. But let's say that's not the case. The majority are not crated, but they're free in the house.
Yes.
Do you think that most of these dogs have someone who comes and checks in on them or takes them on a little outing once a day? Or is that rare?
Again, I have no data. I have no data on that. I think some dogs do get that, especially when they're young, or so if they have to be crated. But if they're not crated anymore and they can go 8 hours without having to go outside, that's what they know. But they're with the owners, all the time when hopefully, again, some people shouldn't have dogs because they can't spend any time with them, but they're with the owners in the morning, they're with the owners in the evening. They might be perfectly happy just being with the owners those times. And then I'll ask you the same question about free roaming dogs. How much of their time is spent actually doing something versus just sleeping or resting?
Little time is spent actually doing something.
So most of the time they're just laying in the sun.
Exactly. They're most active in the morning and in the evening, at least in climate zones that are similar to where I am. So that cooler hours of the day, that's when they walk around, explore, socialize, scavenge. And then in the hotter hours of the day, they sleep somewhere. I think for me, like part of it is just the option to be able to choose where you want to go and when you want to go. Maybe that's a very anthropocentric view that dogs don't actually care about.
Yeah, there's no way to know.
Yeah,
it is anthropomorphic. You're thinking what you would want to do, and you think the dog should want to do that too.
Right. As I was thinking about this, I realized after our written conversation the other day, I realized the reason I feel strongly about free roaming dogs generally having a pretty good life is because of the things I value in my own life. For being honest, it has nothing to do with what a dog would value in their life, or if they even value, air quotes, you can't see, dear listener. Like, do dogs value things? I don't know. Like, who knows? So my definition of an average free roamer is really hard to define. I've observed them in various parts of Central and South America and in Thailand. So these are 2 small slices of the world at large. And I've read a lot about them in all kinds of places. But obviously a large part of their life quality will depend on where they live. Here, just like temperature-wise, the kind of climate I personally prefer is tropical mountain climate. It's spring-like year-round. The free roaming dogs, if they don't get to be inside the house, that's okay because they're not cold and they're not hot. But if you were a free roaming dog in Antarctica, that would be very different, right?
I've been there too, and I did not see any free roaming dogs.
There's probably a reason for that.
That's right. Yeah, but yeah, again, are there free roaming dogs in cold climates? I don't know.
It's interesting, like, because the studies that I have looked at, those are mostly observational studies. And there are very relatively few studies out there. I think because the problem is that up until recently, or maybe still today, the domestic dog is not considered an animal worth studying because it's considered an artifact that we humans created. So there are all these studies about the life cycles of wild animals, but only relatively few about domestic dogs.
We know the life cycle of domestic dogs because we control everything about it.
Right, but that is a different kind of, like, studying them in their natural environment is hard because, like, what is their natural environment? I might argue that their natural environment is not the household, the human household.
Well, I would argue that it is because without the household, those dogs would not exist. Now, we're not talking about stray dogs and dogs that result from accidental litters that end up in shelters. That's a whole nother topic, the life of a shelter dog. Having just spent 2 days last weekend at a shelter medicine conference, the topic of this conference was basically behavior and how how they express their behavior at a shelter. What can we do to facilitate as much natural behavior as possible, if we know what natural behavior is?
Right.
So again, there's another population of dogs. I don't consider those pet dogs. Shelter dogs are not yet pet dogs, but pet dogs, what is their natural behavior? It's, for my dogs, their natural behavior is going for walks when I go for walks, training when I train them, sleeping when I'm not doing anything with them. So you said something early, and I agree 100%. Their behavior is 100% controlled by what I do.
Yeah.
You also said something about research. I did not want to do a lot of reading on the subject of free roaming dogs before I talked to you, but I did take a peek on the veterinary website that I use. And there are over 100 papers within the last 10 years on free roaming dogs and various aspects of their health and behavior. I read the abstract of one article. They compared 2 free roaming dog populations in 2 different countries with farm dogs in Switzerland that were allowed to run free.
I remember. I've read that paper too.
Seen that? Yeah. And the thing that I found interesting, and again, we talked about this, is that there are 2 parts of the day where the dogs are active, whether they're free roaming or farm dogs. And that's 2 hours in the morning. I think it was 7 to 9 a.m. And then 2 hours in the afternoon, evening. I think it was like 4 to 6.
Yeah.
I did not read the whole paper, so I don't know the details. But whether they're pet dogs or free roaming dogs, they're not doing something all day, every day, like most people are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they had a choice, if my dogs had a choice to do anything they wanted, I have no idea what they would choose, because they have never had that choice.
Yeah.
And seem perfectly content to not have that choice.
Right.
So
because your dogs are not average pet dogs, and you are making sure, like, in my opinion, I'm assuming that you're meeting their needs, so they're content in a controlled environment. The average pet dog maybe is still in a controlled environment, but not getting their needs met.
I agree with you on that. And that's one reason, if you listen to the behaviorists, that's one reason there's a lot of behavior issues in dogs, because we take dogs that have certain needs. And again, the needs depend on the breed. I think you would agree with that. And they're not getting their needs met. So some dogs, because of their breed or their temperament, are fine with not getting a lot of exercise. And some dogs are not so good with not getting exercise or their mental needs met or proper diet. Yeah, you could argue that a lot of dogs are not getting their needs met. But does it matter? If the owners are perfectly happy with their behavior and the dog is, quote unquote, well taken care of, does it matter if their needs are not met?
I would say it does matter, but that is, again, obviously an opinion.
Yeah. One thing you said earlier is that you think of what the dogs don't have, and I think of what the dogs do have.
Yeah.
And one thing, because obviously I'm a veterinarian, I know that there are a lot of medical issues that dogs can have that you cannot see. So if a dog is really, really thin, you can see that and you think, oh, that dog's not getting enough food.
Well, let me
go ahead.
Can I briefly interrupt you? Yeah. I think people usually think of free roaming dogs as dogs who don't have a home. From my observations, that is not true. The free roaming dogs I've seen, or I see around here, they usually do have a home. They have people. They're just free to come and go. So
they are getting fed enough.
Oh, yeah. They're usually, so if a dog is extremely thin, this is something I rarely see. And if I do see it, then, I mean, it's obvious to me, either that dog it's probably a sick dog, or it is truly a feral dog, because that's the difference. A feral dog is not a typical free roaming dog either. The free roaming dogs I know and interact with, they all have families. They have people who love them. They just don't love them in the Western culture kind of way. And I'm assuming like there's this paper about free roaming dogs in Baltimore from, I think, the 70s. So it's not that long ago that dogs were, even in the US, for example, there were lots of free roaming dogs. It has just rapidly shifted now.
Yes, it has rapidly shifted. Because I agree with you. You know, when I was growing up, I mean, we didn't let our dogs out loose, but a lot of people just opened the door to let their dog out, and they wandered around the neighborhood, and then they came home at night.
That's what to me the typical free roaming dog is. They may not necessarily sleep in the house, but they usually have shelter, and they have a place where they go back to at night and sleep. That may be inside the house, or it may be a dog house, like right outside the house. But they usually have a place where they can hide from the rain, for example, or seek shade from the sun. They belong somewhere. And the people who put out that dog house would say, this is my dog.
Yeah.
And sometimes more than one person would say that, because these dogs, they have friends, because I sometimes follow one around for a while and just to see. So they have their routines. So that dog may wake up in their doghouse at, I don't know, let's say at 7 a.m. And the owner will like put a bunch of cheap kibble in front of them. So the dog will have their first breakfast, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a brief interaction with the owner, if you want to call it that. And then the dog will go about their day. So they will take a stroll to this other house where they know they will get a little snack, because they do every day. This person may also be thinking of this dog as their dog. And then maybe they'll sleep, or maybe this other person will open their door to them and they will come in and just hang out for a little bit. And then they keep wandering off, and know that at noon, there's always this taco stand at the corner, and they'll just pass by there. And the taco person who knows the dog will cut them a slice of meat. So most of the free roaming dogs I see, they're definitely, some of them I would call overweight. My dog is athletic, at an athletic weight, and definitely thinner than the average free roaming dog that I see. Obviously, I can only speak to the dogs in the places where I have observed them myself in that respect. I know it's different in some other countries that I have not visited, so I have less observational data there. But for example, here in Guanajuato, as well as in Antigua and Guatemala, there are also people who will put out food at different spots in town. It's usually kibble, and sometimes it's there all day because the dogs just don't eat it because they have something better.
Yeah, because taco meat is better than kibble.
Yeah, they have choices that the average pet dog doesn't have. And there are water containers all over town. Small businesses often do that. They will put a water container out right outside, both for people with pet dogs, so they'll walk by and stop because their dog will have a drink, and for the free roaming dogs. I feel like their food and water needs are generally being met. Their needs for shelter are generally being met. And the freedom to express normal behavior, whatever that is for them, is also being met, because they make friends with people and with other dogs. And they're usually extremely good communicators. You don't usually see dogs fighting, because fighting is an expensive behavior. I feel like in the pet dog population, there's a higher, like, injuries due to dog fights happen much more frequently. And that's probably partly of the selective pressure. Like, we don't select for sociability, or not to the degree that maybe we should or could. And partly because of leashes and walking dogs on leashes. Leashes don't allow them to communicate freely the way that free roamers do.
Yeah, I can't argue with anything that you say, but I'll offer a different point of view. But again, as I said earlier, is when I was saying, if you see a very, very thin dog, you might think it's not getting enough to eat. And then you said most free roaming dogs are owned. And I think that's important distinction between free roaming and feral. And when I see a group of dogs, if I'm traveling and I'm only in a place for a few days or a week or so, I don't know anything about those dogs. I don't know if they are feral or free roaming. But what I was going to say, if you see a dog that's very thin, there's really no way to know if that dog's not getting enough to eat, or if that dog has a medical problem that's not allowing it to absorb the nutrients it needs.
It's very likely the latter. I would assume that it's a medical problem, or it's a feral dog who has too much of a flight distance to access the food sources that are available to free roaming dogs.
Right.
Because there's no lack, like in urban spaces like this one, there's no lack of food sources.
Right.
So I'm thinking it's a medical problem. Yeah.
And then what other medical problems are we not seeing? Like the dog that you mentioned at the beginning with the broken leg or dislocated elbow joint. That was a pet dog. It would either get medical attention or it would be euthanized. So it would not be left to, and again, air quotes, suffer. That dog in the video didn't look like it was suffering. It looked like it just had a dangling leg, and oh, I can't use this leg. Oh, I guess that's how things are now. So I don't think dogs sit around feeling sorry for themselves because they have an injury.
Also, in that video, that dog was busy barking, so probably experiencing a spike in adrenaline, and not like, I mean, at that moment, probably not feeling the chronic pain that he might be feeling otherwise. Yeah.
And if he has chronic pain and he just says, well, this is just how things are now. And he's not thinking, oh my God, it hurts. I wish I had some pain meds. I wish somebody could give me that. Dogs, I don't think they think that. They just go, oh, this is how things are now. And I have seen pet dogs come into the clinic, having been hit by a car with a fracture, hopping in on 3 legs, wagging their tails, greeting everybody, seemingly perfectly happy and not in pain.
That's crazy.
I know it. I mean, until you see it, you think, oh my God, this dog.
How's that even possible?
It's got a broken leg, or it's got this huge wound. It's like, oh, it's wagging its tail and saying hi to everybody. And then I've seen, dogs come in screaming in pain for, various reasons. And then the first thing we need to address is getting some pain meds on board to relieve the pain. And free roaming dogs, as well as feral dogs, but we're not talking about that. If they get hit by a car and are killed, does the owner ever know that? I mean, what if the dog is hit by a car and crawls into the bushes and dies back there? Does anybody ever know? Or does the owner say, oh, he didn't come home today, I don't know what happened? And are they sad? And the dog that you saw with the big wound, I mean, did that dog get medical care? Does it matter?
Yeah, I don't know. Like the wound, the first time I saw it, it had a bandage, like there was a bandage, and then it was gone. But that may just have been something that the owner put on the dog. So I don't know.
Right. But again, you can argue, well, does it matter? That dog healed and did fine.
That dog,
with a lot less expense, and it would have cost, if I had seen that wound and was treating that dog, it would have taken weeks and weeks to treat it, and it would have cost the owner probably thousands of dollars.
How much would it have cost the owner? I'm curious.
Well, thousands, because you're seeing them, if you're bandaging it, you're seeing them frequently, if you're changing the bandage. And sometimes you have to sedate them to change the bandage because they won't tolerate letting you do it. So that adds an expense. And it depends where the wound is. Sometimes you have to debride it, which means surgically removing the dead tissue to facilitate healing. So I mean, when you're treating a huge laceration or an open wound, it's a long process and it's expensive.
So this dog, for example, was this dog lucky to get the granulation tissue? Or is that what usually happens if you don't intervene?
That's the normal tissue healing. But if I had a dog come in to my clinic with a wound that size, and I said, oh, let's just clip it and clean it and it'll heal, the owner would go to another vet because they would think I'm incompetent. And I've treated lots of wounds where there's these huge open wounds and they fill in with granulation tissue. And sometimes we just allow them to heal on their own like that, but keeping them clean and using antibiotics as needed. And sometimes then we get to a point where we then do a surgical closure. So once we get the wound to a point where we think we can get skin to skin healing, then we close the wound. But like I said, in Western practice, an owner would go to another vet if I told them, no, we don't need to treat it. It will heal in a couple of weeks. But then you have a population of dogs that are owned by people that cannot afford much veterinary care. So in that case, I would see the dog, I would clip the fur, clean the wound and say, okay, just keep him from chewing at it. Try to keep it as clean and dry as possible and it should heal. Because if they don't have the option of paying for veterinary care, I would rather do that than say, oh, we have to put your dog to sleep.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And you give them pain meds.
I give them pain meds, but after a while, it's probably not painful. So.
The average pet owner who comes to your practice or used to come to your practice, well, I guess you didn't have a practice for average pets, but so you wouldn't give them the option of not spending $1,000 in the first place. Or do you tell them, let me be pragmatic with you. There are 2 options. One is going to cost you this much and the other one is going to cost you this much.
No, I often do. With any illness, I tell people, so we could do the cheap version, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but yes, I do give them options because veterinary care is expensive. And I understand that not everybody can afford to spend thousands of dollars, like a dog with a cruciate ligament tear. I always tell the owners, your option is medical treatment or surgical treatment. And I tell them the advantages and disadvantages and the cost of each. And then they make a decision what they want to do. There are some diseases that you don't have a choice. Like if your dog has diabetes and you don't treat them with insulin, they're going to die.
Yeah.
But the dog's not going to die from a torn cruciate. Okay. Now, if the dog has a fracture, then there are some fractures that might heal if you stick them in a cage for 6 or 8 weeks, stick them in a crate, and it might heal. It might heal wrong, like the dog with a dangly leg in your video. If that's a fracture, that fracture is going to heal, but it won't heal normally.
Yeah. I'm assuming this is already an old injury because there was fur all over the...
Well, but if there's a fracture, they're not going to lose fur. If he was hit by a car...
But wouldn't you see bruising and like...
Not necessarily. You would see bruising and swelling if you saw it within the first several days, but then the bruising goes away and the swelling goes down, and all you see is a dangling leg. As a veterinarian, I give the owner options, explain the advantages and disadvantages of each option.
So with this dog, for example, the dog with the dangling leg, if that dog came in, would you tell the owner there's an expensive surgical option, or we can put that dog to sleep, or is there a third option?
The third option is to amputate the leg, which might be a little less expensive than surgically repairing the leg, because if it's a fracture and you surgically repair it, then you have to follow up with x-rays to see if it's healing. And sometimes you put pins in.
Yeah. So you would not, the chronic pain this dog is likely to experience is an amount of pain that you would not consider acceptable. So you would put that dog to sleep if the owner was not going to go with one of the other options?
No, I mean, that's up to the owner. It's not my decision.
Yeah.
If it was my dog, they would get immediately. They would get x-rays.
Right.
But again, there are options. If you have a dog with a fracture, do you want to do surgical repair to put a plate on or pins and screws, or do you want to put it in a cast and hope it heals? And there are issues with dealing with a cast. They have to be changed regularly. If they get wet, you have to change it immediately. You have to sedate the dog. So there are advantages and disadvantages of different medical options, but at least most pet dog owners are given those options and make a decision.
Yeah.
The option that's not acceptable to me is no pain control.
Yeah.
But if an owner wants to take the dog home with a broken leg, and I've had owners do that. I've had owners take dogs and cats home that need medical care. And they say, nope, not doing it.
But they did come in the first place. So they came in because they didn't know how expensive it was going to be. Or
Yes, it's usually money. That's the obstacle, which is a hard part about being a veterinarian. I mean, they might have enough money to get some pain meds, and they might have enough money to euthanize a dog, but that animal's not going to get treated until you sign a release form and you leave a deposit. And people think, well, that's cruel, but that's how it is, unless you have pet insurance.
So these injuries, the two that we talked about, they were obvious, right?
Yeah.
They were obvious to me and they're obvious to their owner. And their owners, I mean, I'm assuming the reason the owners are unlikely to take a dog like this to the vet is financial and also cultural and maybe lack of knowledge. So what other conditions? So you've watched, for example, my lemonade presentation, which had a couple of clips of free roaming dogs in them, who I think mostly looked well fed. What invisible medical problems might those dogs have that I don't see?
The first one I think of is endoparasites, so intestinal worms. But again, a healthy adult dog can have a worm burden, and it's not going to cause much problems. Okay. Ectoparasites, fleas and ticks. And again, most of those are just a nuisance to the dog. But if the dog is not healthy or the dog is small, especially puppies, but we're not talking about puppies, then fleas and ticks can cause anemia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if they suck enough blood. When I was in practice in California, and this was before there were these topical treatments for fleas and ticks and oral treatments for fleas and ticks, I saw a lot of anemic dogs because they had such a heavy burden of fleas.
Wow.
Mostly puppies and kittens and young dogs or sick dogs. But yes, I have seen dogs die from anemia because of the flea load. So
wow.
I don't know how common that is in free roaming dogs. I guess it depends on where they are. They can have endocrine diseases like diabetes. If they're free roaming, is the owner going to know if this dog is drinking a lot of water and peeing a lot? Because those are the first signs that owners see with dogs that have diabetes or Cushing's disease. They're drinking a lot of water and they're peeing a lot, but you wouldn't know that from a free roaming dog. You wouldn't know. You would not know if a free roaming dog is not eating the normal amount, because if it didn't eat the kibble, you would think, oh, it ate, somewhere else during the day.
You'll only know once the dog starts getting thinner and thinner.
Yes, or once the dog starts showing other clinical signs.
Yeah.
I would argue that with free roaming dogs, there are medical conditions that would be treated later than they would be in a pet dog, or not treated at all, whether the owner knew about it or not. So
is diabetes, for example, or Cushing's disease, are those common issues, or is that something that's relatively rare?
No, they're pretty common. I don't have numbers as to percentage of dogs that get them, but there are a percentage of dogs that get them. And I don't know if the free roaming population is any different from the pet population.
Yeah, it would be interesting, because I mean, most of those dogs are mixed breed or no breed at all. So maybe there's some hybrid vigor going on, or is that?
Yeah, I think hybrid vigor is a myth.
It's a myth. Okay. Yeah.
I think so. We see the same diseases that we see in purebreds and mixed breeds. And again, I don't have the data for every disease in every breed, but we see torn cruciates in mixed breed dogs as well as purebred dogs. And fractures, hit by car, doesn't discriminate.
But that obviously does not discriminate. That for me, for example, is one of the biggest differences of life quality. If you live in the center of Guanajuato, the town I'm in now, it's a pedestrian city. There are hardly any cars because it mostly has these small alleyways, these callejones. Yeah. And it's safe to be a free roaming dog there. Or it's very unlikely that it will be hit by a car, because you may never in your life cross a street that has cars on it. Or if you do, those are cobblestone streets, and there are lots of pedestrians walking too. So the cars are extremely slow. So it's relatively unlikely that you'll be hit by a car. And I walked my dog off leash there all the time, like right out of my house. Because cars are a huge danger. Where I live now, in the outskirts of the same city, there's a freeway-like street kind of next to my house. And I can't go out of the house with game off leash, because I'm afraid when I'm crossing the street myself. Right. Yes. Yeah. And I know about traffic. And like in the first 2 weeks that I've lived here, I've seen personally 3 accidents. So like, this is insane. Like so being a free roaming dog here is a very different experience. And a much more dangerous one than being a free roaming dog in a very pedestrian place.
Do you think free roaming dogs learn the dangers of cars?
Well, they either learn or they die. Or they die, yeah. Yeah, so the ones I've seen, it's interesting. Like, you see those dogs who always only stay on their side of the street, and they won't step onto the street. So they know, obviously. Yeah. They won't cross, or they use the pedestrian bridges. Yeah. And I see free roaming dogs here too, but there's less population density. And I think that's probably partly because more dogs get run over, and also because there's less food sources out here than there's in the center. The center is more densely populated by people too. Yeah. And also owners in the area where there's not a lot of traffic might be more comfortable letting their dogs out than owners who live where it's more urban with a lot of traffic. Because I know my dogs have no idea what a road is and what cars are, and I have to be very careful. My dogs are off leash a lot, but not when they're around traffic. Right. Same here. There's a couple adult free roamers, Game and I know now, that are really navigating this environment well. It looks to me. Those are probably the one dog out of that litter that got to that age. Because especially when you're a puppy, mortality is extremely high. I think, I wrote it down somewhere. I keep forgetting the numbers. There's like 19% of puppies of free roaming dogs that even make it to reproductive age. So that's a small number. Right. Because they're not born at the owner's house? Where are they born? And where do they live? Because once the mother has a litter of puppies,
she can't be going back and forth to her house from wherever the puppies are.
I think most of them are born at their house.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm now specifically thinking of one example, which obviously is not representative.
Yeah, right, but it's better than nothing.
My neighbors, when I lived in the center, they had free roaming dogs, and one of the females had a litter. They were in that there was kind of a yard that was shared by several houses.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in there, and the gate was always open, so the dogs could come and go. And the puppies, they stayed inside. So you can see, it's really interesting. It was really interesting for me to observe, because humans don't really intervene that much. So you can see the mother making sure that they don't venture too far in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the older they got, the further they were allowed to go, and the less she intervened at all.
Mm-hmm.
When, like initially when I walked by with Game and she was close to the door, she would be barking and being really defensive. Mm-hmm. Because I was too close to her puppies, or Game was too close to her puppies for her to feel comfortable, which she hadn't done before she had that litter. And the older the puppies got, the less intense the mother got as well.
Yeah.
But so they were born at their house, they were fed there. There was always kibble. Like I could see the huge pile of kibble, more than they would eat.
Yeah.
Kibble, like there's really cheap kibble here, which I mean, I'm assuming that just it consists of corn and little else. Whatever, like they get something to eat. And so those puppies were born at home. But also like I borrowed one of these puppies for 10 days.
Borrowed it.
Uh-huh. No, borrowed as in so the people who had the adult dogs, they know me because I walk past with my dog and I sometimes stop and chat with them. And when they had the puppies, I was like, oh, your puppies are so cute. and he, so this guy was like, well, do you want one? And I'm like, well, I wish I could, but I couldn't. It wasn't the time.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, I wish I could, but I can't right now. But later at some point, so we kept talking sometimes about the puppies, about random things. He knew I was a dog trainer and was taking videos for online classes of my own dog. And at one point I was like, what if maybe he'll lend me one of the puppies so I can take some puppy videos. And I'm currently working towards my Control Unleashed trainer certification.
Yep.
And I thought it would be fun to like have train a few of the games I need to submit with the puppy. So I asked him, I told him, man, like they're so cute and I would love to, I wish I had I was in a place where I could take one of your puppies, but I can't right now. But would you lend me one for like a week? And he was like, sure, just
How old
take
was
one.
It? How old was it at that
time? Like 8 weeks. So
yeah.
I made sure to take the puppy at a time that I would take a dog in any other, like if I got it from a breeder.
Right.
So I said, okay, I'll bring her back in a week. And I mean, he may have been hoping, like he said, well, but if you want to, you can keep her too.
Yeah.
So I think he probably hoped that I would keep her. But
yeah. So in that case, I mean, do those people then find homes for the puppies, or do they just become part of their?
So I also asked him because I was curious, and I had a relationship with that person, so we could talk about these things. And yeah, they were trying to find homes for the puppies. But very casually.
Yeah.
Like by, like just telling people that they had a litter and there were puppies available. And one of them got, like the neighbors got one of them, but it just kept coming back.
Yeah, because that's where it lived.
That's where it was born and that's where it felt at home. And the neighbors were also keeping the puppy right from the start as a free roaming dog.
Yeah.
So the neighbors had to keep coming back to get their puppy.
And then they'd let it out again the next day and it would be
of course. Yeah. Which is kind of funny. But so the puppy I had for 10 days. So I dewormed her and I defleed her because she had, and I think I guess all puppies have worms, right?
Well, if if the mother does, the puppies do.
Yeah. So she had tapeworms that's
from the fleas.
Yeah. So I defleed her, dewormed her, but felt like that was the level, because it's not my dog. I had borrowed it. I didn't want to do anything more intrusive than that. That didn't feel like my place.
Yeah. What about vaccines? Are they commonly given in the area where you live?
So there are rabies vaccine campaigns that are very common, I think, in Mexico in general. As for other vaccines, I don't think there are campaigns for that. So it would depend on the person. And I assume it's unlikely that the puppy or that the dogs would get, like most dogs are probably unvaccinated.
Yeah.
As for they're probably vaccinated against rabies, but not against anything else. Is my assumption. But I don't have data on that.
No, I don't know if anybody does. I would argue that most pet dog owners don't let their dogs loose because they're afraid something will happen to them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I don't let my dogs. I have a fenced yard and I don't live close to a road. Well, I mean, it's about 1/10 of a mile away, the main highway, the main 2-lane road with a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. But I live in the middle of the woods and I could let my dogs out to just wander the woods at their heart's content. But I'm afraid they'll never come back or something will happen to them. I mean, they'd come back if they could, because I think they're pretty good about finding their home. But
they're beagles. They have good noses.
Yeah. I would be afraid something would happen to them, or they would get to a point where they can't find their way home, and then they might wander close to the road. But that makes me think my next door neighbor, and again, I have 30 acres and she has 60 acres, and the neighbor on the other side has 20 something acres. So
that's so nice.
It's not an urban area. It's not like a street in a town. We're out in the country. But when I bought my house, this was 14 years ago, they had a dog, about a 5 or 6 year old dog, mixed breed, middle size, 50-pound dog that was free roaming. So they would let Cider out all day. And I would see her sometimes crossing the highway with cars going really fast, making the cars swerve or brake. And I would cringe. But the owners, they didn't care enough to keep her confined because they thought keeping her confined was cruel. So she would, wander. I don't know what she did. I just saw her often around on her property, but often up the road across the street from us. And she, died of old age of natural causes. She never got hit by a car or injured. But that it would bother me more than it would bother the owners. I think a lot more people would let their dogs roam free if it was legal. But I think most people don't because they're afraid what will happen, because we love our pets. And we don't want anything bad to happen to them.
I mean, so of those dogs who do die, that's a study that has been done in India in 2016, I think. And over 60% of the deaths, if I hope I'm remembering I'll link to the study in the show notes, but I hope I remember the numbers correctly. Over 60% of those deaths are human influence. So it's us, like we are the problem here, right? And that's car accidents, which I'm assuming is pretty high up, like depending on where you live. Or in some countries where it is assumed that there's an overpopulation of free roaming dogs, there are systematic killings of dogs.
So that people shoot them? Is that how they kill them?
Or that the government has makes a campaign to put all the free roaming dogs they can find to sleep.
So they have to catch them first.
Yeah, they have to catch them first, but they're not shy. So
so they
would be hard to catch.
So they just take them and put them to sleep without regard to if somebody owns them and loves them.
That is not the case in my part of the world. I think that is the case in places where, and usually because people are thinking of dogs as a rabies carrying species and as a pest that needs to be controlled.
Yes. Yeah. And in some cases, both are true. I mean, it's true that they carry rabies and they can spread other diseases. There are some internal parasites that dogs get that people can get. I mean, I don't want loose dogs roaming over my property, peeing and pooping everywhere. Or, exposing my dogs to infectious diseases.
I mean, I vaccinate. Pravecto. I like the
Yes.
chemical stuff.
Thank goodness for Pravecto.
Yeah. Because I'm like, because game has contact to free roaming dogs,
Right.
and
Mhm.
and to their poop that nobody picks up, obviously.
Right.
Like
And
she
you-
doesn't eat it, but she sniffs it, and I
Yes.
just want to be.
Yeah.
She also sleeps in my bed,
Yeah.
so
Right.
I want to be as safe from these parasites as possible.
Right. And she has close contact with free roaming dogs, so you want her
Yeah.
protected against infectious diseases like distemper and
Yeah.
parvovirus. You know, same with me. I vaccinate my dogs. They don't come in contact with free roaming dogs, and most of the dogs they come in contact with are owned and well taken care of. But I do check them for parasites once in a while.
Yeah.
I treat them for heartworm every month to prevent heartworm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, heartworm is another disease that can kill dogs, and you would not notice any clinical signs until the very end. So I don't know how common that is where you live, but it's.
I mean, I know it is because I looked at, like, in Austria, where I'm from, that's not a thing. Apparently there are no.
Right, and
heartworms are not yet. I guess it has to do with climatic conditions.
Yes, it has to do with climate, and there are parts of the United States where heartworm is not common.
Yeah.
But all it takes is one infected mosquito to bite your dog to transmit the disease. So
anytime I go somewhere new, I look up what parasites there are common, so what I need to. So yeah, when I went to the US with my dogs, they got to California, they got heartworm treatments throughout that time. When I moved to, and obviously in Thailand and here too, they're on all these. Yeah.
So, you know, when I think about whether pets or free roaming dogs are better off, I, of course, think a lot about medical care, treatment and prevention of injuries and illness. So I think pet dogs are better off in that aspect. As far as activity, I would concede that free roaming dogs are better off in that aspect. Compared to the average pet dog, compared to performance dogs.
That's different.
That's different. So I think it really depends on your opinion. It's like you said, there's very few studies that compare the two. And then, as you also said, when you talked about the 5 freedoms, who decides what those freedoms are? I mean, the definition of those freedoms.
Yeah, that they're so, like, the terms, they don't really mean anything.
They're vague. Yes. So again, we have mostly opinion, which is neither right nor wrong. And that's fine.
Now that I've talked to you, I do agree that in terms of access to medical care, the average pet dog is probably better off. I still, like, I don't know if I think that personally, and I feel like really part of the reason that I'm such a fan of the free roaming dogs life is like a very human reason, is that if someone put a gun to my head and said, you have to be a dog now, pick if you want to be a pet dog or a free roaming dog, I would of course choose the free roaming life.
And I would choose the pet life.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Because I see how pampered pets are.
But I don't don't know if you have that saying in English. In German, there's a saying that to the bird, the simple branch is worth more than the golden cage. And I feel that so strongly as a human, as myself. Like, I've left the golden cage of Austria to live in a part of the world where there are less cages. Like, some people would consider these parts of the world more dangerous too. But to me, it's not a question. That's where I want to be. That's where I want to live. And that's how I want to live. Because for me, it's a life quality thing. And I feel like my life quality is higher here, even though I'm not, like, I wouldn't have the same access to medical care here that I have in Austria. Austria has great medical care. And everyone gets it.
Veterinary care.
And great veterinary care.
So if your dog was hit by a car,
I would fly to you. I mean, that would be a problem because I wouldn't be allowed to board this stupid flight. So I don't know what I would do. I would drive. That's very far.
So again, you know what? There's advantages and disadvantages of everything, risks and benefits, and every individual has to balance the risks versus benefits and make the decision that's best for you. And that's why I always say to clients, there's no right or wrong. There's no better or worse. There's no good or bad. There's only what's best for you or your dog. And if it's best for you, for whatever reason, to euthanize your dog, I don't have a problem with that.
No, me neither, because I feel like once the dog is no longer in pain once it's euthanized.
It's no longer suffering.
There's no welfare issue there.
Right. And to me, the most important thing is I don't want my dogs or anybody else's dog to suffer.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah.
So, but well, let me ask you a question. Why don't you let game out to free roam?
Yeah.
When you lived in the area that was safer from cars, why did you not let game out?
Because I'm afraid that someone would take her. Probably not my neighbors, but the tourists. It's a cultural city, so you get tourists.
Yeah.
I mean, they usually don't go up the callejones because they're afraid that they'll be robbed where I used to live. But I mean, sometimes someone gets lost there, and they will see a purebred dog, and they will think, this is a lost dog. It obviously needs help, and oh my God, look at it. It's thinner than the pet dog I have in the US. It's obviously starving.
Interesting.
They would take my dog, and I would never see my dog again. That's why I don't let her out. Or even if it wasn't that, someone would pick her up for a spay and neuter clinic and neuter my dog. And I don't want my dog to neuter.
Yeah.
So that's why. Otherwise, I would. It's the humans that I don't trust in this respect. And a lot of the humans I don't trust are foreigners who do not share the cultural values of that area.
Or they might just say, I think this dog has no home and is suffering, I want to save her. Think that. I want to rescue her. Yeah.
That's what people who haven't coexisted in a space with free roaming dogs usually assume. They assume the dog doesn't have a home and they want to rescue it.
But the people that live there and know better just assume this dog is well taken care of and not a problem. I don't need to do anything.
Right. Yeah. That's usually the case.
The dogs that you saw you knew that there's nothing you can or should do anyway.
Right. No, I mean, I'm not someone, that's also an opinion, but it's not my place. This is someone's dog. It's not my place to make the decision for them. Whether that dog goes to the vet or not.
Right. I agree.
Let me just add one thing to the why wouldn't I let my dog roam free? So that puppy that I talked to you about that I borrowed for 10 days and I socialized her and trained her, and I was actually talking to Shade at that point because she was looking for a dog for one of her clients who'd make a good pet dog. And we were considering, I didn't want to keep her for more than that time because she was probably going to be a free roamer. But the moment that her client would have committed to that puppy, I would have kept the puppy and prepared it further to be a good pet dog. But I didn't want to keep her any longer than that week because I didn't want her to miss out on the lessons of free roaming life that she would get.
Right. Yes, they have to learn.
So then the thing is I gave her back and I would walk past there almost every day and she would join us for a little bit and was super happy to see me in game. And then a couple of weeks later, she wasn't there. And I kept going back because at that point I really had a relationship to that dog and I left her. And after not seeing her for 3 days in a row, I asked the owner of the puppies, have you found her home? He said, no, she should be somewhere around here. And then he looked all over the place on the property and he hadn't even realized that she was missing yet. And he was like, oh, no, she's really not here. And she never came back. So I don't know what happened to her. No, who knows?
Yeah. I mean, some tourist might have taken her home.
Some tourist might have taken her home. There was no body. And but I mean, I'm sure I extended her core area just by taking her places. So in the end, I might have contributed to the fact that if she really ventured all the way to a car street and got run over and the other puppies didn't because they didn't have the experiences I gave this puppy, or if a tourist was walking through that alley, she would have been the first puppy to approach because I facilitated more contact with people than the other puppies probably had. Yeah. So then she would be the one who would be taken rather than the others. So I don't know what happened to her.
And that is the reason I think that most pet dog owners in the US don't let their dogs loose. I also think it's different in very rural areas of some states. I bet there are a lot of free roaming dogs. I just don't see them because I don't live in that area. But from my experience when I was in general practice, and even now in the dogs that I see, they're all pets. They're all even performance dogs. I think most performance dog owners would say they're my pet first. And I'm not
Yeah.
even sure if pet is a politically correct
I
word
like
anymore.
companion.
Companions.
Yeah, like
I think
a companion dog.
they are all our companions because it was our choice to
Yeah.
acquire them. It was not their choice to come to us.
Yeah.
And so as much choice as we like to give our dogs, we pretty much control their lives.
Yeah.
For good or for bad, we control
Yeah.
their lives. I would argue that my dogs are pretty happy with that.
No, I'm sure they are. They get the best of both worlds because they do
Yes.
get to run off leash and use
Yeah.
their noses and spend a lot of time with you. And at the same time, they have excellent veterinary care. They get probably high quality food and they have the comfiest of beds.
Yeah. Well, my bed.
Yeah. I still, like, my dog is in a similar position of having the best of both worlds, but still, when I thought about that further with the gun to my head, pick pet dog or free roamer, I wouldn't even pick my dog's life. I would pick the life where I can maximize my own choices. But that is not, I mean, that is obviously not about dogs at all. That's just about me as a person and how strongly I feel about my own personal freedom, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that colors, that obviously colors my view about all living beings in ways that are entirely subjective. Yeah.
You know, that's okay, because that's all we have to base our decisions on. I actually have not even thought if I would come back as a pet dog or a free roaming dog. But if I had a gun to my head, I would say I want to come back as a pet dog in a performance home.
Yeah.
So, but you know, even most pet homes, I think those dogs are very well taken care of. If you don't put your thoughts and feelings on what they should or shouldn't be doing, I think most of them are quite content with their lives.
Yeah. No, so, I mean, that's probably true. Yeah.
And that's why this discussion was so fun, because I value your opinion. I find it very interesting, and you make me think about things I hadn't thought of before. So that's good.
Yeah, and you give me facts. That is, I like that, the fact checking, because, for example, when I see an injured dog, like, I'll think something about it, but I don't know. Like, I just don't know I don't have the education to be able to even have an educated opinion on what I'm actually seeing. Yeah. Yeah. And I want to learn, I love learning these little things that you have taught me over the last couple of years. That is so valuable to me. Thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate that.
You're welcome. And I always say, if I have data, I want to base my decisions on data.
Yeah.
If I don't have data, your opinion is as good as my opinion.
Yeah.
Because once there's no data, it's just opinions.
Right.
If people choose to see the data and don't accept it, well, that's another story. But that's for another podcast.
Yeah, that would be a very long one. Even longer.
Yes, it would be.
Well, so let's wrap this one up.
Okay.
So before we end, do you have any upcoming classes that you would like to plug, or other events, or where people can find you on the internet?
Yeah, you cannot find me on the internet because I don't want to be found. So I do have a Facebook page, but I never look at it. I do teach a class for FDSA once a year on canine sports medicine, and that's usually in the April term. I just gave a webinar on the different options for sterilizing your male and female dogs. And Jessica Heckman and I are going to repeat our webinar on whether you should or should not sterilize your male and female dogs. And we're updating the webinar that we gave in 2019. And that is sometime in September. I don't have the exact date. Yeah, it should be on the schedule.
Okay, so I'll put a link to that on the show notes.
Yeah,
I'll put links to your class if it's on the schedule, and to your...
Yeah, it's probably not on the schedule. Yeah. And I also wanted to tell you that I really like the name of your podcast. I listened to the first 2 episodes, so I would have a clue what's going on. I found them both very interesting. As somebody who's closer to the end of my life than the beginning of my life, not to be morbid, but that's just how it works. I have had a wild and precious life, and I'm very grateful for that. And I don't plan to go anywhere anytime soon, except more traveling. But I like really have to come visit me. I know. I was listening to Peter talking about the lake, and I'm assuming that's in Guatemala.
You've seen the lake.
That picture.
Yeah.
I'll come visit you there if you go back there.
I'll go visit Peter at some point in any case, so we could just go together.
Well, you let me know. I'm planning a trip to Scotland next spring, but
Nice.
what time of year is the lake the nicest?
I would say right after the rainy season, because you still have all the green stuff, but you don't get caught up in surprise, extremely strong rainstorms. I'll check with Peter and I'll get back to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll come visit you there.
Oh, there's this amazing Airbnb that I've stayed at the lake. It is so, it's at the lakeshore. It's so beautiful. Oh my God, we should totally go there.
So yeah,
Well,
I'd come to Guatemala.
Knowing that, you will come to Guatemala.
Yes, I will, and we'll walk around the lake and talk about dogs and anything else we want to talk about.
Nice.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sue, for taking the time out of
You're welcome.
Your day to chat with me. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And
I did too.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon, and also to our dear listener.
I think there's more than one, Chrissy.